If you could sit down with 1,000 people who are 65 years old, so people who've lived the financial journey, they made the decisions, they've dealt with the consequences, and you could ask them, what do you wish you would have done differently? What do you think they would say? Do you think they'd talk about a bad stock pick? Perhaps choosing the wrong mutual fund, or maybe timing the market wrong? Well, here's what the research actually says. The biggest financial regrets in America have almost nothing to do with investment returns. And very rarely does it tend to center around things they wish they would have bought or things they couldn't afford. More often, it tends to be about choices or about time. Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to break down a list of the most common regrets. And when you look at the list, you'll start to realize a lot of these aren't even financial regrets at all. They tend to be life regrets that ended up on a balance sheet. So, in today's video, we're going to go over the 8 biggest regrets for those who are in their 60s or 70s. And hopefully, if you're watching this video and you're in your 30s or 40s, you can sidestep these mistakes so by the time you get to that age, you can look back and have less regrets. So, let's dive in. Chapter number 1, not starting earlier. We're starting with this one because without hesitation, this is the number 1 financial regret in America. Survey after survey, Bankrate, Northwestern Mutual, you name it. When they ask Americans what their single biggest financial regret is, the answer is almost always the same. I wish I had started saving and investing sooner. Let's take a moment and make sure we really hear that. I wish I would have started investing sooner. If you listen, we're not hearing people say, I wish I would have picked a certain stock, whether that's Tesla or Amazon or Google or Apple. They generally tend to speak about investing more broadly, investing as a whole. And really, this ends up being more about time than it is about money. It's about having time work in your favor versus working against you and you feeling like you have to scramble to keep up. Let's put some numbers to this. Let's imagine 2 people. Let's say we have Alfred, who starts investing $500 a month every single month from the time he turns 25 through the next 10 years. Then he stops. He never invests another dollar. Then we have another person. We'll call him Benjamin. He doesn't start investing $500 a month until he turns 35. From that point on, he invests for the next 30 years, never missing a single contribution. What happens at a historical 10% average return? Alfred invested for 10 years, contributed $60,000 total, and ends up at 65 with approximately $1.8 million. Benjamin invested for 30 years, contributed $180,000 total, and ends up at 65 with approximately $1.1 million. Benjamin putting 3 times as much money and still didn't catch up simply because Alfred had more time on his side. And this is really one of the most important things we can ever take away about investing. The best thing you can ever do to have more success in investing is have more birthdays ahead of you. And that's really the biggie that people tend to realize once they hit their 50s and their 60s and their 70s. They look back at their 30s and it's not that they wish they would have bought a single stock. It's that they wish they would have started investing sooner. So truly, I feel like this one is more of a time regret rather than a money regret itself. Chapter number 2, lifestyle inflation. This one hits close to home for a lot of people. Behavioral economists have studied this extensively, and the findings are pretty consistent. Humans adapt incredibly well to upgrades in their standard of living. You get a nicer car and it feels great for a few months, and then all of a sudden it's just the car you drive. You upgrade your home to a nicer and a bigger place. After a year, it's just where you live. The happiness spike is real, but it fades far faster than most people expect. Meanwhile, the financial cost of that lifestyle upgrade that doesn't fade, that continues growing over time. Think about what happened to car prices over the last decade. The average new car today sells for around $50,000. The typical loan stretches for 72 months. That's 6 years. People are financing, depreciating assets over timelines that used to be reserved for things like home equity loans. And it's not just cars, it's everything. We add subscriptions left and right as our income goes up. We expand our restaurant budget just a little bit more, or we upgrade our vacation and we make it a little nicer because, hey, we deserve it and we're working hard. And each of these decisions individually can be completely reasonable, but collectively they can end up being this barrier between where you are and where you want to be. That's why I really like the saying, you can have anything you want, you just can't have everything you want. And for those of you who watched my recent collab with the Money Guy show, that was the saying I forgot. Even though I still love it. was the saying, like, you can't have everything, but you can have what is the saying? You can't have everything, but you can have some things that's hand. Just hit it with some confidence, but just hit it with gas. There's some kind of slogan. Here's the line that I think captures it best. Most financial regrets are really about what people actually chose instead of what they couldn't afford. That word instead is really doing a lot of work, because every dollar that you put towards upgrading your lifestyle is a dollar that you don't put in investments. It's not compounding. It's not getting you closer to freedom. And that matters. Chapter number 3, buying too much house. I'm pulling this one out of the lifestyle inflation category and giving it its own chapter because for most people, this is the single largest financial decision they will ever make in their entire lives. So it deserves some level of respect. This one's particularly tricky because buying a big home tends to be culturally celebrated. We don't tend to celebrate the people who say, hey, we looked at what we could afford and then we backed up and we bought significantly less. That doesn't seem to make the social media post. That doesn't really get admired at the dinner parties, but the financial reality is pretty brutal. Most people tend to think of a home in terms of the monthly mortgage costs in isolation, but we tend to dramatically underestimate the long-term ongoing costs of home ownership. Maintenance alone, and this is a rule of thumb that real estate professionals tend to use, typically runs 1 to 4% of a home's value every single year. Think about what that means on a $900,000 home. At 1%, that's $9,000 per year just in upkeep. At 2%, that's $18,000 per year. Over 20 years at 2%, you're looking at $360,000. And that's before property taxes, insurance, or any HOA fees. And here's where I want to take a moment and actually throw myself under the bus. I'm actually looking at a new home, and it's quite big. It's too big. I actually hate big homes, but I love the location. It backs up to a big, beautiful park. It's along a bike path. It's on the river. It's absolutely beautiful. I love the location. I hate how big the home is. So what happens going forward remains to be seen, but I am seriously looking at it. For many retirees, their largest asset is their house. Americans ages 65 to 74 have a median net worth of about $410,000, and roughly $250,000 of that is home equity. In many cases, retirees have more of their net worth tied up in their homes than they do in all of their retirement accounts combined. And that can increase your net worth on a balance sheet. But that's not necessarily usable income or an investment account that you could turn into an income-producing asset. Think about the irony here. A dream home can often delay your dream life or your dream retirement. Chapter number 4, being too conservative. Depending on who you are, this one might feel like a little bit of a twist because I feel like we often hear stories about people regretting taking too much risk or losing more than what they felt like they could afford. But surprisingly, when researchers look at retirees at scale, a surprisingly common regret runs in the opposite direction. I wish I had taken more risk. This usually shows up in the form of people holding too much cash or sitting on the sidelines too long, looking at the market saying, it's too high right now. I'll just sit here and wait for it to come down. But then over time, it didn't. Or it's those who sold at the wrong time. People who sold during the 2008 crash or the 2020 crash and then never bought back in. My mom went 100% to cash in the 2008 financial crisis. She was divorced. She was a single mom, and she couldn't handle the volatility because everything in her brain said, get out. You can't afford to lose this. Here's the math on this decision. Historically, over long stretches of time, the U.S. stock market has averaged a 10% annual return. That number is prior to an inflation adjustment. Cash, on the other hand, over those same periods of time has barely kept pace with inflation, or in many situations hasn't kept pace. $100,000 in cash over 30 years at 2% grows to approximately $181,000. $100,000 in a diversified stock portfolio at 10% over 30 years grows to approximately $1.74 million. The difference between those numbers is really about what safe actually means. When you're 35 and you move everything over to cash because you can't handle the volatility, that actually isn't being safe. You're trading stock market risk for a different type of risk. The risk of running out of money or not having enough money to fund your later stages of life. And just because this risk doesn't show up on your brokerage account statement doesn't mean it's any less real. Sometimes the safest feeling choice turns out to be the riskiest one. Chapter number 5, working too long for money they didn't need. Now we're moving to a different type of regret. Less about accumulation and more about what happens when that accumulation becomes part of who we are, part of our identity. This is the part of the conversation that we don't tend to see make headlines with the financial media. They're more interested in saying, you don't have enough. Keep working. But research from major retirement firms like JP Morgan and Fidelity consistently shows that retirees underspend relative to what financial planners project. In fact, many studies show that spending actually declines throughout retirement, not just in real terms, but in absolute dollars, with the exception of healthcare costs late in life. What this means in real life is that a lot of people end up working extra years in order to fund a spending level in retirement that they never actually reach. What happens is that people tend to run the models at, say, 60. We see a gap and we say, okay, I'll continue working to 65 and then I'll close the gap. Then we get to 65. We run the numbers again and we say, that's still got a little bit of uncertainty in there. I'm going to continue working until 67 or 68. The portfolio keeps growing. Meanwhile, these spending projections are often too conservative, and at the same time, all of these years are going by that you cannot get back. This is sometimes called the one more year syndrome and is quite common. The fear of running out of money is often so powerful that it overrides the evidence that the money you need is already there. Some people spend their entire lives preparing for a retirement they were already financially ready for years earlier. That's years of your life. That's experiences that never got to happen. That's a version of your life you didn't get to live because the spreadsheet never felt perfect. Chapter number 6, staying in a job they hated. This is really the emotional companion to the one we just talked about, so I'm putting it right here on purpose. Working too long is the financial version of this regret. Staying in a job you don't like is the human version of this regret. Gallup has been tracking employee engagement for decades. Their numbers are consistently striking. In any given year, a majority of workers describe themselves as either not engaged or actively disengaged at work. Not the majority of unhappy people, the majority of workers. Most people, most of the time, are not feeling energized or satisfied with what they do. Now, that alone isn't a personal finance issue, but here's where it becomes one. People often stay in jobs they hate for financial reasons. Perhaps it's the pension you're 3 years from investing. Perhaps it's the benefits you can't afford to lose. It's the salary that's good enough to make you feel comfortable, but not exciting enough to make the job worth it. And this is really called the golden handcuffs. And those years do go by. Consider the numbers. If you work from age 25 to 65, that is 40 years. At a standard 40-hour work week with 2 weeks of vacation, that's roughly 80,000 working hours. 80,000 hours is not a rounding error in your life. That is your life. And this regret shows up in retirement interviews when you hear people say, I spent too long at a company that didn't feel worth it. I worked for a company where I didn't feel valued. Or, I simply worked too hard. The biggest cost ends up being years of your life where you sacrificed your happiness or you felt underappreciated. Chapter number 7, helping children too little or too late. This one is different, and I want you to really feel the difference because up until this point, the regrets we've talked about have really had to do with one's own life. But this one is about legacy. This one is about the next generation and family. When my grandfather passed away, I ended up talking with the director of the funeral home. This is a man who's seen a lot of death. He's seen a lot of end-of-life moments, and he ended up saying something that stayed with me. What he told me is that he's learned from all of this is that he wants to help his children while he's alive. So he's here to see the impact. And I thought that was a pretty remarkable thing to hear from someone in that position because he has experience here. When both my grandparents ended up passing away, my mom received a modest inheritance. And my mom parked that money in a safe account and she never touched a penny of it. She was at a stage of life where her home was paid off, her kids were grown, and her life was pretty well funded. She didn't need it to rely on. And I kept thinking, what would that same money have meant to her at, say, age 32? Because that's really the question. Is the money more valuable to your child at 35 when they're trying to buy a home, raise kids, and get their footing? Or at 65 when their life is already largely built? First-time homebuyer ages are at historic highs. Childcare in many markets runs $2 or $3,000 a month. Student loan debt is real. The years between 30 and 45 are often the years where people could use the help the most. But these are also the years where most people don't think to give it. So the answer for me is pretty clear. I want to help my son with college. I want to one day help him with a down payment on a home. I want to be here and see that legacy in action while I'm alive. This is a regret that shows up with striking frequency in retirement interviews. The parents who had the means to help earlier and didn't. Maybe it was out of habit or the assumption that simply because it wasn't how they thought about money. This regret often carries more weight than many of the other regrets. And chapter number 8, divorce. I'm choosing to deliberately end with this one because this one can often feel like the heaviest choice, and it clearly shows that financial decisions and life decisions are not separate items. The financial numbers around divorce are genuinely staggering. Research consistently shows that household wealth falls dramatically following divorce. And when you break down why, it makes complete sense. One household becomes two. One mortgage becomes two payments. Legal fees accumulate often tens of thousands of dollars if there's disagreement or contention. Retirement contributions might slow or stop altogether. Assets end up being divided or completely liquidated if there's more unfavorable circumstances. For many people in this situation, divorce becomes the single most expensive financial event in their entire lives. And here's the angle that I think is most important, because maybe we don't need to solely focus on the divorce itself. It's about the financial decisions that increase the pressure on a relationship over time. Money fights are consistently ranked among the top sources of relationship stress. Financial stress, debt, misaligned spending values, disagreements about saving, anxiety about the future that lives in the house. It bleeds over into every area of your relationship. And when it's happening day in and day out, month in and month out over the years, it tends to accumulate until you're so deep inside it that you didn't even notice it until you got there. James Stahn, an incredible and insightful divorce attorney, has a saying that I love. These kinds of things happen slowly and then all at once. Divorce is really expensive because suddenly one life becomes two. You no longer benefit from economies of scale. And I'm certainly not advocating for anyone to stay in a bad marriage. Not by a long shot. But I do think it's very important that you get aligned on your money habits and money communication early on in a relationship. Get aligned on your values, because your values will be embedded in practically every financial decision you ever make. Can understand that finances are among the most emotionally loaded topics that a relationship can deal with, and treat it that way. Everything we just covered, all 8 of these, something becomes pretty obvious. I've never heard someone look back and say, I wish I would have gotten 8% or 9% on my investments rather than the 7% that I actually got. Rather, the regrets I tend to hear are about the experiences and the opportunities they missed. It tends to be more about time. Look at this list with me. The regret of starting late. What it actually costs someone is loss compounding. Lifestyle inflation regret. That is lost flexibility within your life. Buying too much house, that costs you freedom. Being too conservative, that represents lost growth. Working too long represents lost years of your life. Working in a job you hate means lost fulfillment. Helping your kids too late is lost impact that you don't get to see. A divorce represents lost wealth and time. And take a moment and look at that right column. Only a couple of these are really about money. The rest are about time. They're about freedom. They're about fulfillment. They're about impact. Money is just a tool. It's always been just a tool. Somebody who is 65 today can reasonably expect to live another 25 or 30 years, assuming their health is good. And let's add that as a bonus regret to the list, because if you don't take care of your health, you will later regret that in life. But the decisions you make in your 30s or 40s, the ones happening right now, will ultimately determine what those last 25 or 30 years look like. So, what regrets do you think you would have if there were just 25 years left on the clock? Let me know in the comments down below. Does this change how you approach anything? I'd love to hear. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. Or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. I'll see you soon. Bye. This regret often carries more weight than many of the other regrets. Regrets. And oftentimes it hasn't kept pace with pace. Oh, my little boy is outside having the time of his life. Oh, he's so cute. Every parent says that. I know. How do we make it focus? There we go. Like that. That's my baby. Then I feel like I want that baby to grow up in the park. In many cases, retirees have more. Let me see if I can find a picture of the park. Like, I really do hate a big home. I truly do. Oh my goodness, it's so beautiful. Right, look it. Can you beat backing up to a park? Is that showing? There we go. Look at man. Dream for a child. That's why I really like the saying of you can have everything. Nope.